Welcome back, everyone, to Behind the Arc Basketball. Last season, the Oregon Ducks won the Pac-12 regular season title, finishing 13-5 in the conference, and was one game ahead of the UCLA Bruins. For quite a while last season, there was no clear-cut winner for which team was going to come out on top of the conference. UCLA completely turned it around with a 3-4 record to start conference play to finish second in the Pac-12, going 12-6. At the end of last season, there were as many as 7 teams that could have received bids into the 2020 NCAA tournament, with Oregon, UCLA, Arizona, Colorado, USC, Arizona State, and Stanford. This season, I predict that the quality of play in the Pac-12 won't be as impressive as in seasons past, as I project that this season will be a down season for most of the teams in the Pac-12, and that happens to be due to the large amount of talented players that went over to the NBA draft. However, at the top of the conference, I predict that it's going to be a 3-team shootout for a battle for first place. This season, the Pac-12 will play 20 conference games, which happens to be 2 extra games than the usual 18, with conference play beginning in December. In this video, I'm going to give a rundown of my Pac-12 conference college basketball rankings for the 2020-21 college basketball season. We'll start off here at number 12. For my prediction in the Pac-12 finishing last, happens to be the Washington State Cougars. Washington State has not had a winning season in the Pac-12 since the 2007-2008 season. That was which the Cougars last appeared in the NCAA tournament 12 years ago in 2008. That 2008 tournament appearance was under head coach Tony Bennett, which happened to be Bennett's second season at Washington State. Fast forward to 11 years later in 2019, and Bennett would win his first ever national title as head coach of the Virginia Cavaliers. Now, Washington State will be heading into its second season under head coach Kyle Smith. Unlike Bennett, who made the NCAA tournament in year 2 for the Cougars, I predict that it's going to take a miracle for Smith to pull off an NCAA tournament appearance in the second season, as I just do not think that Washington State is capable of having any chance of doing well this season. I feel like it's going to be a rough one for the Cougars this season, and the main reason why happens to be because of the departure of impact forward C.J. Elleby, who decided to go to the NBA draft. Elleby was the Cougars' star player for the last 2 seasons. He started 60 games through his 2 seasons for the Cougars, and he averaged a career 16.6 points per game, 7.5 rebounds per game, and over 1 steal per game throughout his career at Washington State. Elleby will surely be missed for the Cougars, and as well as Washington State will have to find a way to win games without him this season, and 2 other starters as well that left the program due to graduation in the offseason. That was Jeff Pollard and Jervay Robinson, which happened to be Washington State's number 3 and 4 scorers from last season. As for this season's roster, the Cougars will bring back senior point guard Isaac Bonton, who was the team's number 2 scorer and averaged over 15 points per game and 4 assists per game last season. Also back for Washington State will be 3 more players that averaged anywhere between 17 to 27 minutes per game last season. Coming back for Washington State will be Noah Williams, Tony Miller, and Alaj Kunst, as he is from Slovenia, and all 3 of these players started 13 or more games last season for the Cougars, but they did struggle to score, as these 3 players averaged anywhere between 4.5 points per game and 7.7 points per game for these 3 players. The final spot in the starting lineup that I predict will either be filled by a sophomore or a freshman for the Cougars. This season, I predict that Bonton will be carrying the load for Washington State this season, but the rest of the roster doesn't really have any other go-to scoring options on it. With the loss of their top 2 rebounders, with Elleby and Pollard, I predict that Washington State is going to just have a tough season here, and I predict that the Cougars are going to win less than 10 games this season and will finish last in the Pac-12. Now moving on to number 11. At number 11 in the Pac-12 this season, that's where I predict the Oregon State Beavers, as I feel like this team is going to be right at the bottom along with Washington State. A challenging task lying ahead here for the Beavers. Head coach Wayne Tinkle finds himself right on the hot seat with back-to-back 18 and 13 seasons, which actually isn't that bad considering that Oregon State isn't known for their basketball program and that the Beavers have only been to 2 NCAA tournaments during the past 30 years. But this season, I expect things to just get really rough here in Corvallis. Tinkle will be without his son, Trez Tinkle, who played for Oregon State the past 5 seasons. And with Tinkle on the roster, the Beavers had 4 winning seasons of the 5 seasons that he played in. And the season that came with a losing record happened to be when Tinkle was injured that season. He played 6 games during the 2016-17 season, and that's when Oregon State posted a record of 5-27 that season. This season, life without Tinkle's son for Oregon State, it looks like it could get very well rough. The bottom 2 teams with Washington State and Oregon State here in the Pac-12 could have like a Nebraska Northwestern type of season that they did last year with those 2 teams in the Big Ten. In the offseason, Oregon State suffered 2 more massive losses to graduation. The first, of course, being the coach's son. Trez Tinkle led the Beavers in scoring, rebounding, and steals, averaging 18.5 points per game, 6.8 rebounds per game, and 1.7 steals per game last season, but also a second impact player they lost as well from the roster, graduating senior, 7-foot forward, Kyler Kelly, who was 3rd in scoring on the team and 2nd in rebounds on the Beavers, but the biggest impact that Kelly made was his shot blocking abilities. Kelly ranked number 2 in all college basketball in blocks per game, averaging 3.5 blocks per game this past season. As for this season's roster for Oregon State, the Beavers will return 3 starters back to the program with Ethan Thompson, Zach Reichel, and Alfred Hollins. The key player that will be back will be the senior point guard with Ethan Thompson, who averaged almost 15 points per game last season, and he averaged 4.5 assists as well. Reichel, he averaged almost 8 points per game last season, while Hollins averaged over 5 points per game. As the Beavers will need 2 more starting lineup spots to fill for the 2 departures with Tinkle and Kelly there to fill those 2 spots, as Oregon State's going to have multiple players battling it out, as some of those players would include 2 sophomore guards with Gerard Lucas and Gianni Hunt, who both averaged slightly over 13 minutes per game last season as freshmen, and also Wayne Tinkle will be bringing in 2 transfers as well, with junior guard Tariq Silver, who played 1 season at Eastern Michigan and transferred over to Tallahassee Community College to play last season, then transferred in the offseason to play at Oregon State, and another transfer as well coming in is forward Rodriguez Andela, who played last season at the junior college level at Kilgore College in Texas. But taking a look at the Beavers roster here, it just looks really thin with the losses of its top 2 rebounders, Tinkle and Kelly, to graduation. And without the 2 of them back, Oregon State's roster looks undersized as well, as the Beavers are going to be in need of desperate need here. Players to step up inside, low post scores, rebounders, shot blockers, everything, you name it, for Oregon State for this season that they're lacking. And I predict that this season it's going to be a tough one here for the Beavers. And I got Oregon State at 11th place in the Pac-12. Now move on to number 10 here for my prediction, as we'll stay in the Pacific Northwest corner here with the Washington Huskies. I predict at number 10. They had so many big expectations last season for Washington. They had a top 10 ranked recruiting class, but what happened last season? Washington turned out to be one of the biggest disappointments in all college basketball, finishing with a losing record of 15-17, and he also ended up last place in the Pac-12. This season, I expect another bottom of the conference season. That's due to the losses here of Washington's top 2 scorers and top 2 rebounders as well. They were with Isaiah Stewart and Jaden McDaniels, who both headed to the NBA draft after their freshman seasons. Both of these 2 players were responsible for a huge chunk of Washington's offensive production last season. Stewart averaged 17 points per game, while McDaniels averaged 13. This season, head coach Mike Hopkins will bring back 5 players who started at least 9 games. Heading back to the Huskies will be junior point guard Quade Green, who led the Huskies with over 5 assists last season and averaged 11 points per game. The second returning guard will be senior Naz Carter, who happens to be the nephew of Jay-Z. Carter was 3rd on Washington last season in scoring. He averaged over 12 points per game, and I expect Carter to be the leader to lead the Huskies this season. Looking to improve and take the steps up this season for Washington will be guards Jamal Bay and Marcus Sahonis, who as well, he came into the season at times during this past season. And then back at forward will be senior Hamir Wright, who's going to have to establish himself as an improving and productive rebounder this season for the Huskies. Really has to step up this season for Wright, as Washington has 0 players on their roster that averaged more than 5 rebounds per game last season, and that's due to the 2 off-season losses of the 2 6'9" forwards with Stewart and McDaniels, which carried the loads on the boards last season. As Wright's going to really need to step up, along with a sophomore 6'10" forward and Nate Roberts, who only averaged 1 rebound per game, or 1 point per game last season for Nate Roberts. Washington, they just didn't make too much noise either in the offseason when it came to eligible transfer pickups. However, Mike Hopkins was able to get a hold of a transfer at guard with Eric Stevenson, who averaged over 11 points per game at Wichita State. However, at the time of this recording, Stevenson has yet to receive a waiver to play this season. Getting Stevenson here will be huge. It'll be able to help boost up Washington's depth and offensive production, as Stevenson started 32 games during his 2 seasons at Wichita State, and he should be able to become a starter right off the bat if he's granted eligibility. But it's just really concerning here that Washington lacks any sort of quality rebounder or inside scorer on its roster for this season. I predict that the Huskies going to be at the bottom of the conference. Last season, they finished last in the Pac-12, but wasn't as horrendous compared to other bottom of the conference power conference teams like Nebraska, Northwestern, or Kansas State, where they really struggled last season, where Washington finished with a 15-17 record. This season, I predict that the Huskies will improve 2 spots up to 11th or 10th in the Pac-12, but that does not necessarily mean that Washington will improve as a team. I predict that Washington State and Oregon State will be worse than them this season, which leaves me to project here Washington at number 10 in the conference, and I predict that they're going to have a similar finish to what they had last season, as I got the Huskies at number 10. Now I'll move on here to number 9 for the Pac-12 for this season. That's where I predict the California Golden Bears here at number 9. So in its first season under head coach Mark Fox, Cal improved with a 14-18 overall record last season. They went 7-11 in the Pac-12. And this is a year later than what they had the season prior, back in the 2018-19 season, which resulted in an 8-23 record, and they were 3-15 in conference play. This season, I expect Cal to keep on improving. I've got a 1 spot up in the conferences. They've gone from last place back in 2018-19 to finishing 10th last season. I got them up 1 spot to 9th. As I'm going to predict that this team's going to be quite near 500 overall finishing the season. In the offseason, Cal lost its number 2 and 3 scorers with Paris Austin and Kareem South to graduation. This season, however, Fox will bring back junior guard Matt Bradley, the impact player that will be carrying the load this season for Cal as his top player. Bradley has been a 2-year starter for the Golden Bears. He was a second-team All-Pac-12 selection in 2020, as Bradley averaged 17.5 points per game last season and has converted on over 41% of his three-point shots during his career so far at Cal. And getting back Bradley, that is massive here for California, as he is expected to carry the offense, and that's one of the things that Cal struggled with last season was their offensive production. They ranked 332nd in college basketball in points scored last season. As far as other players heading back to Cal, back for the starting lineup will be their top 2 rebounders from last season with fours, Grant Antasevich and Andre Kelly, as both of these players averaged over 5 points per game last season. And I expect both of these players to continue to improve, as well as Cal's going to bring back 2 sophomores that started over half their games last season, as well as freshmen with Lars Thyman and Joel Brown. Besides Bradley, last season, the rest of Cal's lineup didn't have any other big-time scorers, with the entire roster averaging under 10 points per game, besides Bradley, who averaged 17.5. However, in the offseason, Fox was able to land 2 decent grad transfer pickups at guard to help boost the offense and have a good opportunity to be a part of the starting rotation this season. The first transfer happens to be guard Mikhail Foreman from Stony Brook. Foreman averaged 15.5 points per game last season for the Seawolves, and he knocked down 4 3-point shots in a 16-point game against Seton Hall. Foreman made at least 5 3-point shots in 7 of his games last season, as he is going to be no doubt able to come into Cal and give the Golden Bears perimeter a much-needed boost. The second grad transfer coming into the team will be guard Ryan Betley from Pennsylvania, as he averaged 11.6 points per game last season, 5.8 rebounds per game for the Penn Quakers in the Ivy League, and he scored 22 points against the Providence Friars, 20 points against Arizona, so he can put up some numbers against power conference teams as well. So both for Foreman and Betley here, scoring at the major conference level, that should be of no problems. They've both been able to prove that last season in their non-conference games. as I predict that Bradley here, he's going to be a first-team all Pac-12 selection that will carry California this season, as I'm going to project that the offense for Cal will be much better as well. There's 2 transfer pickups, and I'm going to predict California this season will finish 9th in the Pac-12. Now I'll move on to number 8 here for my Pac-12 predictions. This one I've got for the USC Trojans at number 8. So I predict that USC will be a bubble team this season, the first bubble team, but I predict that USC will not make the NCAA tournament. Southern Cal had a young roster last season, but the majority of those players from the Trojan squad a year ago played off the bench, with the exception of freshman big man Onyeka Okongwu. Head coach Andy Enfield, he's going to have a ton of roster spots to fill here as the Trojans had their top 5 scorers from last season leave the program in the offseason. Leading USC was leading scorer, leading rebounder, and elite shot blocker, as he looks to be a top 10 NBA draft pick when Onyeka Okongwu, as he left after his freshman season. Double-digit scores. Jonah Matthews and Nick Rakocevic also graduated from the program, while their number 4 scorer, Daniel Yatomi, also graduated as well, and their number 5 scorer, Elijah Weaver, transferred over to the Dayton Flyers. These 5 roster departures will lead way to more players trying to prove themselves in for this season now for USC. Last season's bench full of freshmen will now turn into some of these players earning much more playing time as starting sophomores. Enfield will only bring in back 1 starter from last season, with sophomore point guard Ethan Anderson, who led the Trojans in assists, and he averaged only 5.5 points per game in his first season. And also, the player that I expect to move up into the starting lineup will be 6'10" sophomore forward Isaiah Mobley, as he averaged 6.2 points per game and 5.3 rebounds per game during his freshman season, while averaging just over 20 minutes per game. The older Mobley brother of Isaiah Mobley, he should be able to see his minutes increase, as he will be playing alongside his younger brother, Ethan Mobley, who happens to be a top 3 5-star recruit heading into USC. Evan Mobley, a 7-foot center, will slide right into the starting lineup spot to replace Okongwu, and I expect Evan Mobley to be a star in the making this season for the Trojans, as I predict both Mobley brothers are going to bring a tough scoring and rebounding duo this season. They're going to be tough to stop here for the Trojans, as USC is also going to be bringing back another sophomore player here with forward Max Agbonkpolo, who is a 4-star recruit as well, but averaged less than 3 points per game last season as a freshman. And proving the depth of this roster will be transfers here that Enfield picked up in the offseason. Even though they're not really big name transfers, they can be some good little pieces here to complement USC. Heading over to the Trojans, we grad transfer guard Taj Edey, who had a down season last year but averaged 15 points per game during the 2018-19 season for the Santa Clara Broncos. Another grad transfer heading in at forward will be Chavez Goodwin from Wofford. Goodwin started all 35 games last season for the Terriers, and he's going to be able to help boost up the team as well. And then Noah Bauman, who sat out last season, as he should be able to help out around the perimeter, as Bauman was a career 45% three-point shooter during his 2 seasons at San Jose State, and he comes along to USC as well. So this season, I expect the Mobley brothers of Isaiah and Evan to carry the Trojans, as I predict that USC's bread and butter for this season will be their scoring inside with the 2 big Mobley brothers. I predict USC is going to be a bubble team. They're going to miss the NCAA tournament, but they'll finish 8th in the Pac-12. Now I'll move on here to number 7 for my Pac-12 predictions. It happens to be the Arizona Wildcats, another team I predict in the bubble, and I predict that Arizona will miss the NCAA tournament as well. So last season was an underwhelming season once again for head coach Sean Miller for Arizona, as there was tons of hype in the offseason leading up to last season for the Wildcats to be at the top of the conference. The hype last season led myself to believe that this team would be a consistent top 25 team last season, which was capable of being more like a top 15 team. However, that did not happen, as Arizona had an underachieving season as they kept on going in and out of the top 25 every other week or so from January to February. Arizona finished with a record of 21-11 overall, and they only went 10-8 in conference play, which was tied for 5th in the Pac-12. All this was done last season with an Arizona team that brought in a top 10 recruiting class for 2019. The Wildcats as well, they were inconsistent at times, and they had some bad losses on their schedule against St. John's, Oregon State, and Washington. This season, head coach Sean Miller is really on the hot seat once again. Arizona lost its top 6 scorers in the offseason as the team will return 0 starters. Arizona lost their top 3 scorers here, which all led the team last season as freshmen with Zeke Naji, Nico Mannion, and Josh Green. Also, Miller lost 4 graduating seniors as well, with Dylan Smith, Chase Jeter, Stone Gettings, and Max Hazard. This season, Arizona will have a completely new-look roster with a bunch of different faces. Only 2 bench players will return back to the roster for Arizona, which is junior guard Jamerl Baker Jr. and senior forward Ira Lee. To offset some of the scoring production from the many departing players for Arizona, Miller was able to land in some transfer help here with 2 transfers. Should be able to come in right away as starters and help boost the Wildcats in scoring. Heading over to Tucson will be guard James Akinjo, who started 32 games for the Georgetown Hoyas as a freshman. He was named the Big East Freshman Player of the Year in 2019 as he averaged over 13 points per game in his freshman season. Akinjo only played 7 games for Georgetown last season as a sophomore before he left the program during the season, but he'll be joined by another player that should be starting right away. Second impact transfer heading to Arizona, senior guard Terrell Brown from Seattle, who was a 2-year starter for the Seattle Redhawks out of the WAC, and Brown averaged over 20 points per game last season, and scoring against Power Conference team, check. No problem for Terrell Brown. He scored 21 points against Washington, 23 points in the non-conference slate against Syracuse. Another transfer looking to impact Arizona will be sophomore 6'11" forward Jordan Brown, who sat out last season due to transfer rules, but Brown only averaged 3 points per game during his freshman season for Nevada, but he happened to be a 5-star recruit coming out of high school. Headlining the freshman class will be a 4-star small forward, Dalen Terry, but they don't really have like big name freshmen like they did last year with Nico Mannion, Josh Green, and Zeke Naji. This season, I expect that the transfer guards of Akinjo and Brown are going to be Arizona's strong suit here to lead the team in scoring this season. However, there's still a lot of question marks about Arizona with bigs on this roster and rebounders that can help out the team. Jordan Brown does have potential to rise out of the newcomers, help out inside and on the rebounds, but the big question is whether Jordan Brown can get back to his old form that scouts saw when he was coming out of high school as a 5-star recruit. With a bunch of new faces here trying to prove themselves this season for a roster spot in Arizona, I predict that the Wildcats will miss the NCAA tournament once again. I have Arizona finishing 7th in the Pac-12 for this season. Now move on to number 6 here. We'll go to the Colorado Buffaloes. I got a number 6 in the Pac-12. I predict that Colorado will be another bubble team, but they will not make the NCAA tournament, I predict as well. So Colorado was ranked in the top 25 for most of last season, but couldn't finish off their remaining schedule strong as the Buffaloes happened to drop their last 5 games. Still, even with the 5 losses in a row to close out last year, Colorado would have been an NCAA tournament team. This season, I predict the Buffaloes to take a step down as I project that they will not make the 2021 NCAA tournament. They'll be on the bubble, but I predict that they're going to be on the wrong side of the bubble on Selection Sunday. The reason why I predict that Colorado will not be a tournament team is because of the loss of the impact player, leading rebounder Tyler Bay, who went over to the NBA draft. Replacing a player like Bay, that's going to be such a difficult task for head coach Tad Boyle to do. Bay was the Pac-12 Defensive Player of the Year last season. He averaged almost 14 points per game and 9 rebounds per game while leading Colorado in shooting efficiency, blocks, and steals. Colorado also lost 2 more players from the roster to graduation, with starting guard Shane Gatling. Also lost bench player with 6'10" forward Lucas Seiwert. As for this season's roster, the Buffaloes will have a roster full of upperclassmen with 5 seniors and 2 juniors on it. The key player to look out for this season for the Buffaloes will be 3-year starting guard McKinley Wright IV, who was a first-team All-Pac-12 selection last season. Wright withdrew from the NBA draft to head back to Boulder as he led the Buffaloes in scoring and assists last season, averaging over 14 points per game and 5 assists per game and nearly 6 rebounds per game as a 6-foot guard. The second starter coming back to Colorado will be senior guard Deshaun Schwartz, who averaged almost 10 points per game last season, and he is a 2-year starter from the program. Junior forward Evan Batty also going to be back as he'll return as well. Batty was second on the team in rebounding behind Bay last season. Head coach Tad Boyle able to bring in a solid grad transfer with a forward, Jariah Horn from Tulsa, who should be able to start and help out the Buffaloes right away with scoring and rebounding. And I predict that the guards of Maddox Daniels, Dalen Counts, and Eli Parquet, they're going to all battle it out, I predict, for the final starting spot in the lineup. I project here that McKinley Wright IV is going to have a massive season carrying Colorado this year, but I just feel that the Buffaloes are missing that key player with the departure of Tyler Bay from the roster, and I predict that Colorado will miss the NCAA tournament and finish 6th this season in the Pac-12. Now move on to number 5 here for my Pac-12 predictions. This one goes out to the Utah Utes, another team I predict that will be on the bubble this season, but I predict that Utah will not make it into the NCAA tournament. So Utah is coming off an inconsistent 2019-20 season in which the Utes had victories over Kentucky and BYU, but only went 7-11 in conference play with only one win on the road. This season, I expect the Utes to keep on improving as Utah will bring back six of their top scorers from last season in the Pac-12, or actually the number 6 scorer from last season in the Pac-12 with junior forward Timmy Allen, who averaged over 17 points per game last season. Allen is one of 4 starters returning this season for Utah. The only player of significance that left the Utes in the offseason happened to be shooting guard Booth Gotch, who transferred over to Minnesota. As for the players returning back to the starting lineup alongside Allen, Utah will bring back sophomore point guard Rylan Jones, who should keep on improving upwards, as well as Jones averaged almost 10 points per game last season, and he led the Utes in assists as well. Utah will also be bringing back starting junior forward with Riley Batton, and also sophomore 7-foot center Brandon Carlson, who he averaged 7 points per game as a freshman, but averaged less than 4 rebounds per game, as I expect both Batten and Carlson to keep on improving upwards as well for the Utes. And Utah will also get back a senior guard as well with Alfonso Plummer, who I expect to move up into the starting 5 as he was a bench player last season. He only averaged 15 minutes per game, but he was pretty efficient from the floor while doing so, shooting 42% from the perimeter and averaging over 8 points per game last season off the bench. As for roster depth this season, Utah will also have back sophomore forward Michael John Tunin, who he played off the bench as a freshman, and he was second on the team in rebounds behind Timmy Allen. As I expect Utah just to keep on trending upwards in the conference in the Pac-12, and I predict that Utah will miss out on the NCAA tournament. They'll be on the bubble. I have them missing out on the NCAA tournament, but I've got them finished at number 5 in the Pac-12. Now we'll go to number 4 here. We will take a look at tournament teams I've got here. So I predict that there's going to be 4 NCAA tournament teams this season that come out of the Pac-12. Here's the first one I got. I predict that the Stanford Cardinal will go 4th in the Pac-12 this season. I predict that Stanford will be a top 40 team and will make the NCAA tournament. In the offseason, Stanford was looking like a top 25 team, but that was until Tyrell Terry decided to head over to the NBA draft, which happens to be a massive loss for Stanford. Terry had a phenomenal freshman season. He averaged 14.6 points per game, 4.5 rebounds per game, and 3.2 assists per game, while converting on over 40% of his three-point shots. With the departure of Terry, I predict now that Stanford's going to be a top 40 team, still able to earn a bid into the NCAA tournament. Of course, the good news this season for Stanford is that they'll bring back 4 of their starters, with Oscar da Silva, Dejon Davis, Spencer Jones, and Bryce Willis. Joining the starting lineup will be 5-star freshman, small forward, Zaire Williams, who should be able to make an immediate impact right off the bat for Stanford. As for the starters returning, the Cardinal will be bringing back senior forward Oscar da Silva, who was Stanford's leading scorer last season, averaging over 15 points per game. And he was also the leading rebounder as well, averaging over 6 rebounds per game. Sophomore forward Spencer Jones, he should keep on improving as well for Stanford, as he averaged over 8 points per game as a freshman last season. Senior guard Dejon Davis also back. He averaged 8.8 points per game last season, and he'll be playing along with junior forward Bryce Willis in the starting 5, who averaged almost 8 points per game as well. The Cardinal also going to be bringing back a good bench piece with junior forward Jaden Dallaire, as Dallaire averaged over 6 points per game and over 16 minutes. He played on average last season. And then, of course, the loss to Tyrell Terry. That's the one that hurt Stanford here. But the arrival of five-star freshman Zaire Williams, that is one that Stanford fans should be excited about for sure, as the Cardinal will look to see if they can make their first NCAA tournament appearance since 2014. And I predict that Stanford will finish fourth this season in the Pac-12. Now we're down to three, and these three teams right here, I expect that it's going to be a three-team shootout at the top of the conference this season in the Pac-12. I'll get to number three first, as I've got all three of these teams as top 25 teams. The first one happens to be the Oregon Ducks at number three. Oregon suffered a massive loss in the offseason when the Pac-12's leading scorer, Peyton Pritchard, graduated from the program. The Ducks also losing two more starters in the offseason. Anthony Mathis, Shakur Houston graduated from the program. But with three losses to replace in the starting lineup, head coach Dana Altman worked the transfer wire once again tremendously, bringing in an experienced group of upperclassmen. Heading over to Oregon will be UNLV grad transfer at guard with Amari Hardy, who averaged 14.5 points per game. He is the older brother of Jaden Hardy, who's predicted to be a top 5 recruit in the class of 2021. The Oregon Ducks also getting a hold of a transfer over from Rutgers with Ford, Eugene Amarui. He averaged almost 14 points per game, over 7 rebounds per game back in the 2018-19 season for the Rutgers Scarlet Knights. A third transfer with another Ford with Eric Williams Jr. heading over from Duquesne, as well as he averaged 14 points per game, 7.6 rebounds per game back in the 2018-19 season for the Duquesne Dukes. As for another solid transfer, still question marks whether he can play this year due to a waiver that we've yet to see so far, but that would happen to be LJ Figueroa from St. John's, the leading scorer for the Red Storm last season. Scrappy defender, solid player, can definitely boost up Oregon here as he averaged 14.5 points per game last season for St. John's with just under 2 steals per game. And he is a low-key, underrated piece here. LJ Figueroa can definitely help out Oregon. At the time of recording this video, though, Figueroa is yet to receive a waiver to play this season, but he did apply for one. So if he is able to be granted that waiver, that is huge here for Oregon for this season. As for Oregon's perimeter, returners for returning this season will be their two guards, Chris Duarte and Will Richardson, as their perimeter still should be solid here for the Ducks. For Chandler Lawson, he's going to be back as well, along with a big man, N'Faly Dante. He'll be back for his sophomore season as he looks for more of an impact here in year number 2. Sophomores Addison Patterson, CJ Walker also expected to come back, should be able to improve here as well. But I feel like Oregon, they just need players to step up and cut into some of that production from Peyton Pritchard last season. If I had to predict a breakout player this year for the Oregon Ducks, I would go with Will Richardson, as I predict that Richardson is bound to have a breakout season here for Oregon. But with all the great transfer pickups by Dana Altman in the offseason, I feel like Oregon here able to be boosted right into the top 25, and I predict them that they're going to be a close third-place team in the front running here, along with the two top front runners. So I've got Oregon at number 3, really close to number 2 and number 1 in the Pac-12. Now I'll move on to number 2 for my Pac-12 predictions. That's where I've got the Arizona State Sun Devils this season. I predict that Arizona State will be a top 20 team this season, as the Sun Devils perimeter, it's going to be fire this season. Absolutely lit, as they'll be returning senior guards Remy Martin and Alonzo Verge. As both of these players are going to be back for the Sun Devils. Martin averaged over 19 points per game last season. He has the chance to be in the running for a National Player of the Year award. And also Alonzo Verge averaged 14.6 points per game from the bench last season. And these two players will be joined by an impact 5-star freshman guard with Josh Christopher coming along to the program as well, as Christopher should be able to produce right from the bat here for Arizona State. That offense for the Sun Devils, that's going to be tough to stop right there with their 3 guards in the starting lineup. Inside, however, there's a lot of question marks. As inside defensively, rebounders on the team, a lot of question marks still. As in the offseason, Arizona State's leading rebounder, Romello White, transferred over to Ole Miss. With the loss of Romello White, the Sun Devils will definitely need players here to step up on the boards this season, as this team lacks a true rebounder on the roster. Arizona State had one more player depart in the offseason, happened to be their number 3 scorer with Rob Edwards, who graduated from the program. Returning back to Arizona State as well with other players here besides Martin and Verge will be 6'8" senior forward of Kamani Lawrence, who started 23 games last season. Head coach Bobby Hurley able to get in an impact 4-star freshman small forward as well, when Marcus Badgley, who is a younger brother of current NBA player Marvin Badgley III. Hurley able to bring in a grad transfer also at guard here that should be able to make this offense even more lethal, with Holland Woods, who happened to be a 3-year starter out of Portland State, and Woods averaged over 17 points per game and over 5 assists per game last season. That trio, it is dangerous this season for Arizona State, with Remy Martin, Alonzo Verge, and Josh Christopher. That has potential to be one of the best starting guard trios in all college basketball. The Sun Devils were saved here by the decisions of Martin and Verge to withdraw from the NBA draft, and now they have a chance here to compete for a Pac-12 title. Remy Martin, National Player of the Year candidate. That's where I predict him. He should be in the running for sure. And I predict that Arizona State will finish in a close second place to the leader in the Pac-12 this season. I've got the Sun Devils at number 2. Now we're down to 1 here. The team that I predict that will take home the Pac-12 crown this season happens to be the UCLA Bruins. I predict that UCLA will be a top 20 team this season. What a turnaround from Mick Cronin's squad last season. The Bruins started out with an 8-9 record overall. They were 1-3 to start off in Pac-12 play. One of those losses in non-conference play came against Cal State Fullerton. And then the Bruins made massive improvements throughout the season. They closed out the season with a 7-1 record during the last 8 games. This season, UCLA should be able to ride last season's ending momentum right into this season. Heading back for his second season as head coach for the Bruins will be Mick Cronin. He's going to be bringing back the entire starting 5 here for UCLA. The key player to be on the lookout this season is senior guard Chris Smith, the catalyst to the turnaround from last season. Smith led the Bruins in scoring, averaging over 13 points per game last season. Last season's leading rebounder, junior forward Jalen Hill, he is back as well. He averaged almost 7 rebounds per game. Also heading back for UCLA will be sophomore guard Jamie Hawkes, who is third in the team in scoring as a freshman. Junior forward Cody Riley, he'll be back as well, as he averaged just under 9 points per game. The last player returning back to the starting 5 is point guard Tiger Campbell, who led the Bruins in assists per game, averaging about 5 assists per game. To help the Bruins out off the bench, UCLA will return 3 bench players from last season's roster with guards Jules Barnard, Jake Kyman, and David Singleton. All 3 of these players averaged between 12 to 20 minutes played per game last season off the bench. Cronin was able to give UCLA an even bigger boost to the bench in the offseason here with Johnny Juzang, sophomore guard, with a pickup transfer from him as Johnny Juzang transferred over from Kentucky. Juzang was granted a waiver by the NCAA, and he is eligible to play this season, as Juzang didn't have much of an impact as a freshman at Kentucky since he was basically buried on the team's depth chart, but Juzang should get multiple opportunities this season for UCLA, as he was a top 35 recruit in the class of 2019 coming out of high school. This season here, I predict that big things are in store for the Bruins. The return of leading scorer Chris Smith, who happened to withdraw from the NBA draft, will give the Bruins a golden opportunity to capitalize and take home the Pac-12 crown in my prediction. UCLA has 3 big rebounders back in the roster, while Arizona State has 3 tremendous guards. I'm going to go big here, take the big rebounding team with UCLA over the Sun Devils, as I predict UCLA will win the Pac-12 this season in a close race over Arizona State and Oregon. I've got the Bruins at number 1. So that's a wrap here to this video, my Pac-12 Conference College Basketball Rankings for the 2020-21 college basketball season. Make sure to like, share, comment, subscribe to my channel. Also, ring the notification bell so you can be notified about future live content here, my play-by-play basketball live streams here as well. Feel free to check out my college basketball preseason top 25 video as well, and all the other great content I have going on Behind the Arc Basketball. Thanks so much for watching, everybody, as this is Behind the Arc Basketball.